morning to you. Welcome to Business Morning. I am BC Adebayo. Oil prices are down today, adding to steep losses from the previous session and headed for weekly declines on worries that renewed lockdowns following a surge in coronavirus cases in the U.S. and elsewhere would suppress fuel demand. Brent crude fell 1.72% to $41.62 a barrel in early trade, and that's after falling more than 2% on Thursday. For U.S. oil, they also shed 2.09% at $39.79 a barrel after a drop of 3% in the previous session. Brent looks set for a weekly decline of nearly 2% and U.S. crude for a fall of more than 3%. Now, while many analysts are expecting economies and fuel demand to bounce back from the pandemic, record daily increases in coronavirus infections in the U.S., which is the world's biggest oil consumer, have raised concerns about the pace of any recovery. Oil inventories also remain bloated due to the evaporation of demand for gasoline, diesel, and other fuels during the initial outbreak. And U.S. crude oil inventories rose by nearly 6 million barrels last week after analysts had forecast a decline of just over half that figure. And back home, about 2 weeks ago, President Muhammadu Buhari flagged off the construction of a $2.8 billion, 614 kilometers Ajaokuta-Kaduna-Kano natural gas pipeline, which is the single biggest gas pipeline project in Nigeria's history. The AKK gas pipeline project, which is expected to be completed within 2 weeks, is designed to create steady and guaranteed gas supply network between the northern and the southern parts of Nigeria and enhance power generation capacity. Joining us now for a conversation on the project's progress report is the Executive Chairman of Oluserve Nigeria, Mr. Emeka Okwosa. Good morning, Mr. Okwosa. Thanks for joining us on the program. Now, you are one of those involved in this project. Could you tell us the current state of the project?
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you.
All right, I was asking you that as one of those involved in this project, could you tell us its current state as we speak?
The AKK project, let's put it in perspective. First of all, I want to use this opportunity to thank His Excellency, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, for making all the efforts to make sure that we got to where we are today. The Nigerian Gas Master Plan has been on the table for close to 20 years now, and it's been built in different phases. AKK, which is Ajaokuta-Kaduna-Kano pipeline, is one section of the entire Gas Master Plan, but a very important section. You may not believe it, the process of tendering and awarding or trying to execute this project started more than 10 years ago. But when His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari came into power in 2015, he accelerated the process and made it to be possible today. So the current situation today is we commenced work on it already. We are far gone in the engineering design. We've already started construction activities, and this project is meant to be delivered in 2 years' time, and it's going to be delivered on schedule. Thank you.
Now, there are concerns on the possibility of delivering this project within the space of 2 years, just like you mentioned now, and some believe that it's too ambitious due to the security concerns and attacks on pipelines as well. Now, what security measures have you put in place to mitigate the risk during and after construction?
First, let me put it again in proper perspective. The first thing to know about projects like this is that this project has been conceived and then modeled properly. NNPC is in charge of this project, and they are controlling this project process. And NNPC, led by Mele Kolokiari, has done a great work in making sure that the proper processes are put in place. The way it's structured is this. We are the contractors. We are building the fourth segment that will start from Ajaokuta and end up between Abuja and Kaduna. And then another contractor will take it from there all the way to Kano. And for us to get to that process, there is a proper plan and a proper project execution process, which involves the contractor, it involves the client, which is NNPC, it involves a project management company that is well tested. So basically there are processes put in place. The concerns we hear these are cogent concerns. Of course, we have security problems. We have to deal with community issues, but these are normal. They are normal to a company like OilServe. OilServe has built pipelines since 1995, and as we progress on this process of our discussion, I will avail you of our wide range of experience. With this experience and knowledge and proper schedule of work, which has been risked entirely, to the extent that we know what the resources that will be required, we know what the issues that will come up, like security, we're engaging the community adequately and making sure that we take all the necessary precautions. But beyond that, what is important is to prepare and then be able to schedule properly and then, of course, have all the resources to meet the process. We are confident that this project will be delivered. This is a project that is being done professionally, and we are following all the international standards.
Now, we also understand that the first phase of the project, which is where you come in, is projected at about $855 million. And just around 2 weeks after the flagging off of the project, the Naira was adjusted by 20 Naira from 360 to 381. What are the implications of this currency shift on deliverables?
Of course, when Naira versus dollar rate changes, it affects people and it affects businesses in different ways. But this project will, by and large, be insulated from that because a project of this magnitude and type that requires a lot of input in terms of the line pipes being imported, this project is denominated in dollars. So it's ring-fenced. And let's not forget also that this project is a PPP arrangement whereby the contractor and the NNPC jointly sourced the finance. And this finance is basically will be ring-fenced for this project. What it means clearly is that there will not be the risk of running out of funds because of funding system. And then also the government has planned it in a way that this project will be paid for over a long time after it has been funded. So exchange rate will not affect it significantly.
Well, Mr. Okwase, I'm sure you know that Nigeria also has had some gas pipeline projects that should have been completed before the AKK project but have been left hanging till date. What's the confidence that you have that this project won't suffer such setbacks?
I'm pretty confident that this project will not suffer what you term to be the delays that occur. But let's face the fact, anywhere in the world, you plan for projects, you execute, you hardly will execute in a way that reflects 100% the plan because you will encounter issues, but you deal with these issues. Some of these projects you are mentioning have been hampered because of funding, have been hampered because of environmental issues and all that. All these have been taken into account in designing and planning for AKK. You may wish out to know that OilServe as a company has come a long way since our inception in 1995. We have built almost all the gas pipeline supply systems to the power plants. The one to Ihovo in Edo State, Baran in Bayelsa, Ebema in Rivers, you can name all of them, Aloji in Abia State, Osisioma in Abia, Calabar in Cross River. I mean, we've built numerous pipelines and we've kept to schedule and budget. So for us, OilServe, we plan to deliver this project.
Now, the fear of investors in this case, is the policy sustainability. How would you react to that?
Let me put this into perspective once more, because it's good for Nigerians to understand how this is structured. AKK is part of the Nigerian Gas Master Plan, and the Gas Master Plan, the very first phase that was built, started from Escravos, went through Benin and went to Lagos. It was built a long time ago, but since then, a second loop has been also built to feed more gas to Lagos. Then you have the OB3 gas pipeline, which is the interconnector between East and West in order to be able to move gas both ways. And then you have the South to North pipeline, of which AKK is part. Actually, this pipeline will start entirely from QIT, which is Kwa Ibo Terminal, Exxon Terminal in Akwa Ibom, and pass all the way through Obibo in River State, and then get all the way to Umuahia in Abia, to Enugu, to Ajokuta, and then all the way to Kano. Now, this section of pipeline is important because this will feed the moribund industries in the north, especially the ones in Kaduna and Kano. And then, of course, the power plants that are envisaged to be built in Abuja, in Kano, and Kaduna. So it is very feasible. And once this is in place, it makes a commercial sense then to build the QIT to Ajokuta in order to give it more feed. So this is a project that has tremendous impact in the economy of the country, tremendous impact in the exploration and production of gas. You may wish also to know that as we speak, yes, Nigeria has about 200 trillion cubic feet of gas, but some of this gas is being flared. Some of this gas have been drilled and capped because there is no place to take this gas to. This will enable the gas Nigeria has to be commercialized. And one way that Nigeria can industrialize is to use abundant energy we have, which is gas. And gas is a cleaner form of energy than oil of any form. So that's the perspective.
And what you just touched on now brings me to my next question, which is the fact that infrastructure projects of today now have to be designed to address emerging threats of natural and hybrid disasters such as climate change and explosions. Tell us, how climate smart are your facilities for this AKK project? Are there enough to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, this project is doing and will do a lot to address all these issues. Like I stated, gas flare is a major issue. Today, you may wish that a lot of gas is being flared in the Niger Delta particularly. And the reason is not far-fetched. Gas production comes in two different ways. Either you are producing it as an associated gas, which is associated with oil production, or you are producing gas from gas reservoir entirely. Now, a lot of gas we produce today is associated gas. We need the oil, so the gas has to come out with it. If you cannot find a way to commercialize the gas, the tendency is to flare the gas if you must get the oil. So this causes environmental damage. This project will help in addressing this because this project will soak up entirely the gas flare that is remaining. The companies that are flaring this gas will have a destination for the gas. That's one. Number two, you need to also appreciate that when you look at the issue of greenhouse gas and the environmental effect of any energy consumption, gas is by far a better form of energy because it's cleaner, like I stated, cleaner than oil that is being used in most industries. Today, you may wish to know that most industries burn diesel or they burn heavy fuel oil, and these are very injurious to the environment. Gas is a far better source of energy. Now, on the issue of protection, we will build this gas pipeline at the highest level of international standard. There will be a fiber optic protection system, detection and protection system that will be installed side by side. And what we call a SCADA system of measurement will also be installed, such that every bit of this pipeline is monitored 24 hours a day. But I want to use this opportunity to also let Nigerians know that gas is not oil. There is absolutely no gain in trying to tap a gas pipeline. The only result will be an explosion that will be hugely injurious. People are advised never to go close to gas pipeline, because gas pipeline, you don't benefit by tapping. You cannot take gas and store somewhere. So there is no benefit in trying to actually tap gas.
Thank you for that. Executive Chairman of Oil Serve Nigeria, Mr. Emeka Okwuosa. Thanks for speaking with us on Business Morning.
Thank you very much.
Now, frontline consumer goods company Dangote Sugar Refinery has taken over the operations of Savannah Sugar in a bid to achieve backward integration in the commodity market. And this follows the consent of the shareholders at the court-ordered an extraordinary general meeting, which was preceded by the approval of a total of 13.2 billion naira worth of dividend for the 2019 calendar year. Let's see this report.
Shareholders of Dangote Sugar Refinery here via proxies to deliberate on a plethora of resolutions in 3 different meetings comprising the 14th annual meeting, an extraordinary general meeting, and a court-ordered meeting on the acquisition of Savannah Sugar. First off is the annual general meeting, where shareholders unequivocally approved the impressive financial report for the 2019 calendar year, one that the chairman, Mr. Aliko Dangote, attributes to the land border closure.
So closure of the border really helped us. It is also true that, yes, sales went up, but revenue went down because the smuggled sugar really affected us. Thank you.
Next is the extraordinary general meeting, where investors approved the creation of 3 billion new ordinary shares of 50 kobo each and increased the authorized share capital from 6 billion naira to 7.5 billion naira.
Ladies and gentlemen,
having deliberated on the scheme of arrangements between the 2 companies, it's time for the court-ordered meeting. Here, shareholders authorized the takeover of cane sugar production company, Savannah Sugar.
One is a farming company. They also have refining operations within those plantations. And the expertise, which was really initially domiciled in Lagos at the refinery here, would now be overseeing more effectively.
That then means that there will be raw materials for the production of both industrial sugar and consumable sugar. So that has given us hope.
Following the acquisition, Dangote Sugar Refinery believes that it's on track to boost backward integration in the sugar industry.
the refinery will import the raw sugar and produce. This other one, we are actually growing the sugar locally and also producing it all integrated. So I think going forward, it will make us to concentrate and do much better. Our target is that in the next 4 or 5 years to reach something like about 600,000 metric tons of sugar, domestically.
With this historic business combination, all eyes will be on Dangote Sugar Refinery's next financial results, as investors hope the marriage will help reduce pressure on the naira.
Still to come on the program, an assessment of the resumption of aviation activities in Nigeria. Do stay with us. Welcome back. As air travels reopens in Nigeria and across the world, Philip Consulting Limited has conducted a survey to find out how air travelers in Nigeria have been impacted and how air travel in Nigeria will be impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The report also assessed the adequacy of the NCAA guidelines from the customer's perspective. Well, let's look at some of the findings of this survey with the head Philips Consulting Intelligence Unit, Mr. Victor Mba. Good morning, Mr. Mba. Thanks for joining us on the program. Philips Consulting is in the business of human resource strategy and job hiring. So tell us, what's your business with aviation? What's the aim of this survey?
Thank you very much, and good morning for having me. Philips Consulting is we actually conduct surveys for contemporary issues. And in 2015, we actually did a survey on the aviation industry to find out how airlines can revamp their strategies to actually be competitive. So at the wake of the reopening of the airport, we did a survey to find out 4 things. The first was how consumer behavior had been impacted by the pandemic. The next was to find out how suitable the land transportation is as an alternative to air travel. And we also found out how adequate are the NCAA guidelines that have been set up. And finally, we found out how organizations have been impacted by the lockdown of the airports.
So tell us what are
and
some
also,
of the...
we would... Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. So currently, we are actually having another report that is going to be out in a couple of weeks, looking at, as a follow-up to the 2015 report that will actually help companies in the airline industries to optimize their operations and actually find out what customers are saying about them and what they can do to remain afloat during this COVID-19 period.
Now, just before the release of that report, now tell us what are the key findings of this survey that you already conducted?
Okay, for this particular survey, we found out that customers will cut down their travel significantly by about 66%, limiting travels to just health and business-related issues. We also found out that a lot of customers will still stick to the airlines and not be comfortable going by road due to the unsafe nature of our roads and also the poor infrastructure on the roads. We also found out that a lot of customers are quite comfortable with the NCAA guidelines that have been set out. The most important guideline to them was actually the regular temperature checks. That is basically to keep the sick people away from the flights because they are the most vulnerable and also they are likely to be the ones carrying this virus. Finally, we found out that companies have actually benefited from this pandemic in the sense that most organizations have been able to adopt virtual working styles. We see that things like meetings, conferences, trainings, a lot of companies have gone virtual. And during this period, Philips Consulting have also assisted a number of companies optimize their work from home processes and also have a lot of virtual trainings for these organizations.
Now, some airports have resumed domestic flight operations, albeit with not too many passengers. But what feedback are you getting from customers as regards the safety measure and implementation? I know you touched on it earlier, but could you just tell us more about that?
Well, the safety measures, personally, I was even at the airport yesterday, both the domestic, the international, and the private wing. And I can tell you that the safety measures are adequate and they are being followed, implemented very well. But like I mentioned earlier, we just have 11% of customers who are willing to travel now. So we would actually be able to do a better assessment when we are actually fully operational in terms of customers traveling and businesses up fully.
Now, how confident are passengers enough to get on board these aircrafts, considering the fact that they've been parked for about 3 months and some have struggled to keep up with maintenance due to the losses that they've incurred this period?
Yeah, beyond the fear of contracting the virus, a lot of customers are also skeptical about flying due to the fact that these airlines have been parked for a long time. And what we are seeing is that just 11% of customers would actually travel immediately. A number of them would never travel until a cure is found, about 28% of them. And some others would travel weeks after operations have commenced, just to be sure that they are safe from this pandemic and also that the airlines are in good condition to fly.
Well, many airlines are said to be contemplating increasing fares by as much as 50% to defray the cost of social distancing and reduce load factors. What soundbite did you get from customers concerning this during your survey?
Okay, the increase in fare is something that should be expected due to the forces of the market forces interplaying, but we didn't actually capture that information during our survey. However, the authorities can assist these airlines to be able to, cut down their costs for customers to be able to access this service without necessarily paying so much. So that is just what that is.
Well, let's talk about the federal government's role now. Of course, it's supporting the aviation industry with 27 billion naira as part of the Economic Sustainability Plan stimulus package. But when we compare this to what we have in other countries like in Senegal, in Kenya, in South Africa, and even Rwanda, it looks like that amount may be slightly inadequate. How much more should Nigeria be adding to this stimulus in view of the critical nature of aviation to the economy?
Yes, 27 billion naira, might not really be inadequate, depends on how that fund will be used actually. But for an industry that loses about 21 billion naira monthly, there is, the federal government can still do a lot to assist that industry. For instance, some other countries are having bailouts, direct cash bailouts to airlines. Some other countries are giving tax waivers and a lot of other incentives. So the government's 27 billion, well, it's a good start, but I think that figure can be improved upon to actually assist these companies looking at the losses they have had to incur during this pandemic period.
Now, your report says that not all airports in Nigeria will survive the scrutiny of the Federal Aviation Authority of Nigeria and the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority to reopen due to their aggressive intention to achieve global standards under COVID-19 guidelines and aviation protocols. Why is that? And tell us what could be their major challenges.
Well, beyond the infrastructure deficit in some of these airports that are just managing to, just have the flights at the basic level, we see some other behavioral issues that need to be taken care of before they can be certified by FAN or NCAA to be able to fly people. For instance, you look at touts, we still see touts at the airports. We still see people who are not really adhering to all the guidelines in terms of putting on their mask and social distancing. So as soon as these airports are able to comply, I think most of them will be certified by NCAA for use. Beyond compliance to the guidelines, another issue is commercial viability. Not all the routes currently are viable for flights. So it depends on how soon these airlines can be, the airports can be commercially viable and also comply fully to the guidelines as set out by the NCAA and FAN.
Now, the authorities are saying that under the new protocol, passengers for domestic flights should arrive 3 hours before departure and international passengers 5 hours before. Of course, many are complaining that for a 1 hour flight, for instance, the waiting time is too long. And, for an industry that needs to boost demand for its services after 4 months of downtime, is this long waiting time justified?
Well, for a flight of 1 hour, you have to wait for 3 hours. I think that flight waiting time is not justified. And also, remember from our survey, another finding from that survey is that 30% of customers actually say that they would arrive at the airport just in time to avoid long time of interaction with other customers. So that's 3 hours waiting time, I think, is something that the authorities have to, look at again to actually see how they can reduce that waiting time for customers to be comfortable coming to the airports and getting flights. The airlines also have a huge role to play in this area by ensuring that their online platforms are up and running, and then they, as much as possible, try to encourage their customers to have their check-in and everything done online so that the customer waiting time will be reduced. Another measure that can be put in place is to increase the number of staff at the counters, such that when customers come in to make physical bookings and to also check in physically and check in their luggage, it can be faster.
Right. Now, the airports in Abuja and Lagos, of course, opened for business on July the 8th this week. Now, when do you think that the other airports will come on board?
Well, as I earlier stated, the other airports would come on board as soon as they are certified by the NCAA and the FAN as being safe. They will also come on board as soon as it is commercially viable for them to be reopened. Because looking at the fact that customers will cut down their travel significantly, a lot of routes will be redundant for some time. Looking at the commercially viable routes Abuja, Lagos, maybe Kano, Rivers. Apart from these states, a number of states will not see regular customer flyers going there. So it depends on how soon these airports can be certified and how soon people can be confident to fly into these destinations.
Well, just before I let you go, tell us what's your view on the single African air transport market. Do you see that complementing the AFCFTA in boosting trade and accelerating economic growth?
Definitely. The single African air transport market is an enabler to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Everywhere in the world, an efficient transport system is a prerequisite for economic development. And one of the aims of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is actually to boost economic activities in the African region. So if we have open skies and we are able to liberalize the aviation industry in Africa, it's a very good enabler to the growth of the African space in terms of the economic activities.
Head Phillips Consulting Intelligence Unit, Mr. Victor Mbath, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, time now to get a review of yesterday's activities at the Nigerian equities market with Temple Ashaju. Good morning, Temple. Well, just before you reel out the numbers now, let's talk about Dangote Sugar. You were at the 3-in-1 event yesterday that led to the acquisition of Savannah Sugar. Tell us more about that.
Correct. Basically, we know that Savannah Sugar, which has a lot of plantation in Noma area of Adamawa State, is now on the Dangote Sugar. Now, what Mr. Aliko Dangote said yesterday is basically that this is to help us achieve more of backward integration, as we've already heard in that report, because they're going to be able to leverage the plantation, the massive 20-something hectares of land that they have of sugarcane plantation that they have in Adamawa State. They're going to be able to leverage that for the production of sugar, as opposed to just importing the sugar raw material into the country and having to take it straight to the refinery to then produce for what you and I consume as staples here locally. So now they're not going to be needing so much of imported sugar anymore. Instead, they will grow the sugar cane in Adamawa State and other farmlands that they have across the country, and then straight take that from the farm to the refinery here and then manufacture locally. That is going to now save us a lot of foreign exchange. As you know, BC we already have some sort of technical adjustments by some 5%, which is 20 naira all the way from 360 to now 381 naira. So that's something that Dangote is helping to now retain in Nigeria locally. And in the long run, we do expect that will reduce the pressure that we currently have on the naira, at least by some appreciable margin in the market. But let's look at the numbers of yesterday. We saw a decline of just 0.01%. That's technically, that is flat, actually, and that translates to some 700 and something million naira worth of decline yesterday in the markets. That's if we price in the loss that we had from the equity capitalization of the exchange yesterday, in spite of the fact that, yes, we got some 15 losers in the markets yesterday, led by Corner PLC, which is a downstream operator, and of course some 7% gain that we saw on Law Union and Rock, which at the end of the day drove up the performance of that company, but it led some other 9 companies that gained yesterday. But look at the volume of transaction yesterday was a decline, 17% down yesterday to 192.08 million. And I should say that some investors took profit on the shares of Fidelity Bank yesterday. That then reduced by some 0.56%. And of course, some million units of shares traded there. Now, the value of transactions declined by some 47% rather, to 2.47 billion naira compared to what we did in the previous trading session. Look at the number of deals. We've got some 3,833 deals in the markets yesterday. If we look at the sectoral performances, the banking stocks were up yesterday thanks to some 5% gain that we saw across Sterling Bank. ETI was also up. GT Bank was up by more than 1%, 1.1% specifically. And of course, we saw the Zenith Bank also did some 0.6% gains yesterday in the market. market. Put all that together, we got some 60 basis points performance across the segment of the market yesterday, which is quite impressive. If you look at the consumer goods side of the market, that experienced some declines. Of course, that's some profits taken on Dangote Sugar, which of course saw the acquisition of Savannah Sugar yesterday. We saw PZ also declining yesterday, in spite of the fact that yes, they just concluded plans to now do away with the food production line. Now, a couple of other stocks here under the consumer goods side of the market experienced some sort of profits taken yesterday, because again, if you look at how they've been performing in recent times, they've been doing more of gains compared to what the banking sector had. Industrial goods side of the market, we saw Boa Cements making a comeback again yesterday, pushed up the indices by some 0.02%. And of course, the insurance space, I told you earlier that Law Union on Rock was positive by 7%. If you add that to the 3.30% that we saw on ICO Insurance, which is now up by some 114% year to date in terms of its performance, that's year to date of ICO PLC, you have the 64 basis points that we got on this space. But for the oil and gas space, some folks are down with corn oil, and of course that takes us down to the energy side of the market. Adova PLC remained unchanged. You've got it at 11 naira 65 kobo, and then you have a 21 naira share price here for corn oil PLC, of course, which is putting out some dividends to investors, I think around 2 naira or thereabouts. And of course, that follows the 10% decline that we had here yesterday. 11 PLC, no change. MRS, no change. O&O folks are waiting and watching to see when some folks like you will come on board, buy, and then they can take some profits, and possibly you have the opportunity of some other profits sometimes in the future. Seplat yesterday had an event that didn't have any impact on the share price. Look at Total. All of these key companies that we have here remain unchanged yesterday, and of course, these folks didn't move at all. They haven't seen so much of red. Now, let's look at the NASD OTC side of the market, which is the exchange that has the unlisted securities. They were positive yesterday. Check it out. Some 14 basis points rise yesterday in the market. Some 520.97 billion naira worth of transactions. That's what we still got on this side of the market. And of course, check out the volume of the transactions. Yesterday, we saw some positive movements on CSCS, which opened lower but then closed higher. And of course, Afriland was also positive yesterday. Had some 2 deals, CSCS some 2 deals, and of course, some 3 deals on WAMCO. Actually, WAMCO saw a bit of profits taken yesterday, and of course they had some key volumes, of course, that translated to what we have here, in spite of the fact that the volume of transactions yesterday declined by some 77.3% in the market. So basically, this is what we've seen across the markets, but we've been seeing in recent times some interest on the NASD OTC, and that's because of the lackluster performance and risk-averse investors' activities on the equity side of the market. So typically in the Nigerian capital market, once you start seeing some lackluster performance on the equity side of the market, you see folks locally here coming back to the NASD OTC exchange, didn't see some valuations and, of course, some fundamentally sound equities or securities that they can then buy on this space. And that's why we've been seeing some sort of performance on the side of the market. Look at what the NSI, which is the NASD Securities Index, is doing in recent times. It's been hovering around the 700 psychological mark, and that tells you that we've been seeing more activities on this side of the market than usual because, again, recall that they had actually declined to some 690-something% in terms of the NSI in recent times, but now it's been hovering around this, but we've seen some sort of stability. And so if you're looking for some actions, actually, if you're tired of the equity markets, check this out. And if you're done from here, you got some profits here, take it back to the equity side of the market, BC. That's what I'm telling you this morning. All
right, Temple. What about the bond and the treasury bill space? Do you have any idea of what happened at the market yesterday?
Yes, absolutely. Some key interest on this side of the markets. Yesterday, we saw some key actions on this side of the market. Here you've got July paper, which is the 2034 security, and of course, the 26th of April 2049 paper. On this side of the market, we saw some key actions yesterday. If you look at what these did in terms of yields, we got some 10.8% yesterday, and of course, here that's because we've been seeing some investors moving away from the shorter end of the curve now to the longer end of the curve. If you look at what we saw at this short end of the curve, and of course, this mid end of the curve, it wasn't so much compared to what we did here. Here, we've been seeing some 7% plus sort of yield movement in recent time, but the bids that we saw yesterday was unable to match what was expected by some key dealers on the side of the markets yesterday, BC. And I'm sure we'll be able to tell you more on the other side of the program.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that. Just stick around and we'll come back to you to review more of the markets.
Sure.
Well, we'll see what's happening at London, plus, of course, a review of the debt and currencies markets in just a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's head to London, where Juliana Olayinka is standing by to bring us to this morning's latest business headlines. Good morning, Juliana. The British Retail Consortium has flagged that a no-deal Brexit will push up the price of food and household goods, saying that the public should be aware that no deal will mean a hike in the prices of not just luxury goods, but ordinary household goods that every consumer has to buy and replenish. How did the RBC arrive at this conclusion?
Good morning, Bissy. Well, the British Retail Consortium has been conducting some thorough research, as have a lot of observers, ever since Britain decided to exit from the EU. At the end of this year, we will be going into a transition period, because whether there is a deal or not, we will not be a part of the customs union or the single market. Now, what the BRC have been detailing is just the cost to food. At the moment, about 50% of all produce in supermarkets does come from the EU bloc, as well as 30% in restaurants. And there are concerns that the people that will be more harmed if there isn't a deal done at the end of this year are people that are already economically vulnerable. In their report, they did list some of the household items or the food items that are likely to see a major hike. They include beef. They predict that beef could rise by 48% in this country, the cost of cheese by 57%, oranges by 12%, and cucumbers by 16%. This is if, of course, we come crashing out at the end of the year and we have to deal with the European Union under World Trade Organization standards. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, we believe, is hoping to avoid that. And there will be, over the next couple of weeks, several negotiations with the Brexit chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, and others to try and secure a deal before the chief negotiator heads off into the civil servant's role, which he's been pipped to do in September.
Now, travellers arriving in the UK from dozens of countries no longer have to self-isolate for 2 weeks, and the rules are being relaxed for arrivals from more than 60 countries and British overseas territories. Why the U-turn? And tell us if Nigeria or any African country made that list.
Nigeria's not on the list, Bissy. No African countries on the list. They're not alone. US, America's not on the list. Canada, Sweden, Portugal, Mexico, Brazil, Russia, Iran, India, Pakistan and China are not on the exemption list. And there are still severe warnings that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office have put on their website that people should only be travelling if it is essential. For some Brits, especially the English, travelling abroad for a couple of weeks is essential. And they have been sunbathing or seen sunbathing on some of these popular beaches. Why the U-turn? It's because the British government was under so much pressure. There was already so much controversy surrounding the announcement by Home Secretary Priti Patel to put in this 14-day quarantine. A lot of people, including members of the Conservative Party themselves, thought it was way too late in the day, that so many other countries had been doing that months and months before, and it wouldn't make any difference. The airline bosses, of course, took it much further than that. They said that this quarantine rule that Britain was trying to implement would cripple the industry that had already suffered and had already made thousands of people redundant. There was a discussion initially that there would be air bridges, so specific regulations with individual countries. That was scrapped. And so they've decided to do this blanket rule for the majority of the EU and beyond. So you can also go to some places like Thailand and the Bahamas and St. Lucia and other really popular tourist destinations. So yes, starting from today, if you arrive back from, I believe, the 70 different territories, you will not have to self-isolate for 14 days.
All right, Juliana, it's probably going to be another eventful weekend as gyms, swimming pools and leisure centres will reopen in England within days, and that's part of the government's lockdown easing measures, with the UK Culture Secretary suggesting normal life is slowly returning. I'm sure folks like you look forward to that, right?
Yes, absolutely. But I think it's less of the consumer that's happy. It's more of the business owners. This is probably the last, actually, one of the last phases of the ease in lockdown restrictions here in the UK, but particularly England. A lot of these outdoor swimming pools and gyms and spas, as you said, will be, breathing a huge sigh of relief because they have been in so much trouble. We spoke about last week in Super Saturday, the 4th of July, with the opening of the hospitality sector. But the figures that came out 48 hours after actually showed that despite some of the images that the media had put out, it was a pretty dismal display. Not many people did indeed come out. So even though a lot of businesses are happy that the government are finally lifting these lockdowns, some people won't be getting their nails done again. Some people won't be attending these gyms. They'll be using a lot of online facilities and ways in which you can keep yourself fit and healthy, purely because they don't have the money in their pocket. So Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, and the Prime Minister Boris Johnson are really keen to start trying to convince consumers to go out and spend, because the businesses are desperately reliant upon people's money.
I can imagine, Juliana. Well, do enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you again at 1:30 just before you head for that weekend.
Thank you, Bessie.
And it's back to Temple for a review of the debt and currencies market. Back to you, Temple.
Yes, BC, thank you so much. Well, let's quickly look at the bond side of the market again before we move on to the other side, which is the NCB and the open market operations maturities, both as known as the treasury bill side of the market, basically. But so I said earlier, actually, that we saw some more actions on this side of the market yesterday. But that doesn't mean that we didn't see enough some sluggish performance on this side of the market yesterday. Of course, there was some sort of sluggish performance folks are offering, but basically not so much of bids on this side of the market. And we saw a lot of guys that are ready to take some more profit, which is what a lot of analysts and traders are expecting to happen on the markets today. So basically yesterday, as I said earlier, we had on the July 2034 paper, which is at the longer end of the curve, we saw some actions there. This particular paper saw yields now trickling in at some 10.1%. And of course, for the 2049 paper, at the longer end of the curve as well, we saw some 10.8% in terms of the yields for those that had their deals on this side of the market yesterday. And look at the price here, up to now as high as 134 naira and 114 naira 77 kobo. In terms of price now, not yields, but these are the prices on the secondary side of the market. That's for the, of course, 2034 paper. We had some 700 million naira worth of transaction, 500 here yesterday. But when you put all that together, coupled with some other activities that we saw on the side of the market yesterday, gives you a total of a whopping 2.72 billion naira, which explains the sluggishness I'm talking about. The fact that typically you will see way worth more than these in the markets. Yesterday in total, we got just 6 deals. And of course, for the NTB side of the market, investors are looking more at the other side of the market, basically. Not so much of interest on this side of things, but look at the longer end of the curve, the 30th of July 2020 paper, which is where we had some 3% discount rates yesterday on the secondary side of the market. Now we saw some offers coming in around 2.10%, but the bids that investors are offering, or that the dealers were offering yesterday on the side of the market, was 2.5%. So that didn't really work. It didn't match their bids. And so it ended up, there was between 2.5 and 3%. But those that were willing to take profit and move on up were offering it at 2.10%, so that there can be some kind of a decline in the yields for them on the side of the market. That didn't work for a lot of the investors. But basically, we saw a total of some 38, less than 40 million naira worth of transactions on the side of the market yesterday, with those 6 deals in total. Generally, folks are not looking the way of the market. Here on the side of the OMO side of the markets, not so much of actions as well. In fact, the 8th of June paper, which was recently issued by the DMO, was an area where we were seeing some offerings yesterday, or a lot of offers. That's not here, and that's because there was offer but not so much of bid on the side of the market. Well, folks, look at this end of the market, September 2020 paper, which is basically at the mid end of the curve. Then you looked at the February 2021 paper, 13 deals in general, and of course, just 12.12 billion naira. But folks are expecting that all of this lackluster performance that we saw across the markets yesterday will find a way to moderate today on the secondary side of the market, BC.
Well, let's see if their hopes will actually come to pass. Thank you, Temple.
Thank you, BC.
And that's where we end the program for the week. Thank you for watching. I am BC Adebayo.